are very fortunate this evening to have an opportunity to view one of the few surviving copies of the first printing of the Declaration of Independence. And let me describe exactly what that means. We go back to 1776. That endless train of abuses and usurpations has made us all very tired of King George III and the British rule. Second Continental Congress is meeting in Philadelphia, and on June 11th, a committee of 5 delegates was chosen to write the Declaration of Independence. 3 names are very familiar to all of us: Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. 2 others, less well known, Robert Livingston and Roger Sherman. They agreed that Jefferson was the best writer, so he was assigned the task of writing the Declaration. He spent the rest of June working on that draft. When he finished it, he submitted his draft to Congress, and during the first days of July, they debated it and they changed some of the passages. And on the evening of July 4th, Congress was satisfied that the Declaration said what needed to be said, and they approved it. Less than a month after the committee was named and Jefferson was asked to take the lead in drafting. Not bad for committee work. And a government committee, of all things. So Jefferson took that finished document to a Philadelphia printer named John Dunlap. And working through the night, Dunlap typeset and printed about 200 copies of the Declaration on large sheets of paper called broadsides. And you can think of it as a newspaper insert or a big poster. It was these broadsides, these 200 broadsides, that the couriers took out on horseback to cities and towns throughout the 13 colonies and to the Army to be read aloud and posted in town squares. Of the 200 broadsides printed that night, only 25 have survived. And one of those is what we have tonight in the Seidman House, the first printing of the Declaration of Independence. This broadside was published that evening of the 4th or into the day of the 5th, 1776. Now, something that may surprise you, this is actually older than the copy of the Declaration of Independence, that handwritten copy that goes down into the ground each night at the National Archives as the great treasure of the United States, because that's the signed copy. And Congress had to wait till the 13 colonies had approved the Declaration of Independence before the delegates signed that handwritten copy. So while it may look like an ordinary printing, this is a document of enormous historical importance. If that isn't enough, the owner, Norman Lear, who was so gracious to have it out in circulation, paid $8 million for that copy. So it's also valuable in a different sense. It is priceless. This evening's program, we have an opportunity to hear from 3 individuals about freedom. And I'd like to invite Patricia Clark, our poet-in-residence in the writing department, to read an original poem on freedom entitled Under Stars.
I love hearing that story about those broadsides, because to me, those copies that went out on carried by hands and on horseback and were posted and read aloud, that has a lot of power. This is Under Stars. Back from Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee, Maine, from states to stockade settlements, to a place not yet a country, woods, water, and a shore. Back from summer, to heat, sweating skin, to airless rooms cooled only by open windows or a door, by a tall sycamore planted near to make a green spreading shade. Back to men sitting day after day in long meetings, wearing frock coats and ties, debating, listening, putting their lives at risk. Back from 2003 to 1776, to a British king, to rough immigrants who rode the Atlantic's wide swells, to people cutting trees in a new land, vexed by a tyrant's edicts, by a stamp act that taxed nearly all paper circulating, newspapers and civic writs, any pamphlet, license, deed, bond, or bill of sale. The men met in Philadelphia, ideas forged into words by Thomas Jefferson and others, phrases to ring like music to later ears. We hold these truths to be self-evident. From January to July, each month adding to another, it grew clear a storm neared. Later, some of the signers became sick, anxious, and a few gave up their offices early, worn down from living through the feat of rebellion, to assert that all men are created equal. A radical change, how from birth one was entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 56 men signed their names. John Trumbull's famous painting shows them standing in a group in a wide paneled room, men in wigs gathering for a bold act. And to each man there, what was the cost? Oh, Livingston, Clymer, Sherman, Payne, Witherspoon, Taylor, and Clark. More names and more. If we could be half as brave. Isn't this freedom's debt? Under stars, we breathe its sweet air.
You know, it's easy for those of us who were born and raised in the United States to take the Declaration of Independence for granted. But I've observed that many immigrants to our country do not. They come from places that have neither the rights nor the liberties that we do. Take the story of one man, an immigrant, typical in some ways, unique in others. Back in the first decade of the 20th century, he was a very young fellow, 13 to 14 years old at most, and he decided to escape from the tumult in Russia. Traveling all by himself, he worked his way across Europe and lived for a while in the Netherlands, where he picked up Dutch. But his goal was to come to America. He got passage on a ship and arrived on Ellis Island without a penny in his pocket. The officials on Ellis Island should have sent him back, since he had no money. But he took a long look at the young man and saw that he really wanted to stay in America, and sensed that he was willing to work. He worked hard to make a success of his new life. The official pointed out to a big family close in line and said to the boy, "You just blend in with that family and get out of here." And that's how he came through Ellis Island. The young man heard about a part of the United States where many people of Dutch descent had settled. And I think you know where that is. So this young man came to Holland, liked it, and settled there. When the United States entered the First World War, he enlisted, figuring this would make him a citizen. Didn't quite work out that way. But after the war, a man now in his 30s went before a judge, and because he had fought for his new country, he was able to become a citizen. I know the story of this young man well, because he was my father. You'll never find a more patriotic American. One of the things my father was most proud of was to become a member of the American Legion. In fact, he sold more flags than anybody else in the Legion. That flag, with the freedoms and rights it symbolized, meant a lot to him. And it means a lot to me. When I was in the Second World War, as President Murray said, I was taken prisoner during the Battle of the Bulge and transported deep into Germany to the other side of the Elbe River. given my background, a Russian Jew for a father, a Polish Jew for a mother, was a dangerous situation to be in. As we were transported and marched deep into Germany, sometimes crowds would pick out a Jewish-looking GI, pull them out of line, and beat them up. Didn't happen to me, but if the Nazis had known I was Jewish, it might have been different. During these months, I realized what it was like not to enjoy any freedom, not to have any rights at all. The experience helped me understand what my father was escaping from when he left Russia. Helped me to understand what so many immigrants have to go through before they can leave the country of their birth and come to these shores. My father loved this country with a love that was contagious. He passed his patriotism on to many of those with whom he came in contact, certainly to my brother and me. We are proud and grateful to be Americans. Whenever I go to sporting events and hear the Spangled Banner, I tear up. To this day, I get a lump in my throat and tear up because of this great country. I think many immigrants and children of immigrants tear up when we see the flag and hear the music. This country means so much because we live in freedom. We know the meaning of human rights. We can work our way up and do well and do good, giving back to our country, to education, to medical research, and to communities. I know of no place in the world where this could happen on the scale that it does here. No place on earth where people could write the script of their own lives to the degree it's possible here. So I am just thrilled to be here with you to commemorate our Declaration of Independence and to celebrate our being American. God bless the United States of America.
I had an experience while the exhibit was on at the Ford Museum last week, and I was with a friend of mine, and I was talking about the Declaration of Independence, and suddenly a little girl tugging at her mother's dress and looked at me and said, "Did he know Thomas Jefferson?" I don't know Jefferson, but I sure know Washington. Really, this is a very exciting opportunity to see this Declaration of Independence. And I hope it will allow us to become acquainted and reacquainted with the Declaration. After all, in a real sense, it's your document, really, your freedom charter, the freedom charter of all America. We are blessed because of that, truly, in this country. I would take you, perhaps, during the latter part of the war, on just one incident to show what happens when you lose your freedom. We had thought that Mr. Hitler was at the Redoubt area up in Birch's Garden, and I was in charge of a team to go up and see if we could locate the man. When we got there, he wasn't there. But not far away was the infamous Dachau concentration camp. So we went in to liberate that camp. Terrible. You can't imagine. It was the first of the concentration camps that was built in Germany in 1933. And it held initially a few political prisoners, others that didn't deserve to be there, about 8,000. And it had at one time 60,000 in this camp. When we got there were 30,000. There were people who walked in prison uniforms but had nothing but deep, hollow eyes. I thought when first got there that probably they would rush out and say, "I'm free," but they stood around in fear constantly. As we walked through the camp, or dashed through the camp sometimes, we would go to a place, for instance, of a huge room with hundreds and hundreds of bodies in lie, and hear some prisoners would take these bodies one by one, put a device down to the mouth of the individual to get gold from his teeth, and then put him in the furnace. They never stopped. They didn't know what they were doing. They also were prisoners, but under the guards. No one really knew what freedom was. They'd lost it. Innocent people. These were not men of war or women of war. Perfectly innocent people who lost their freedoms because they did not know how to deserve, or how rather, to protect it. A man came along, a young man, I don't know, perhaps in his early 20s. He had no clothes on, he was nude. I noticed he was wringing wet, and I found out that he had barely escaped by being drowned for another trial, as the Fliegerkorps of Germans would put the men under water, and then they would test them from time to time at how long could you stay underwater, at what temperatures before you became unconscious. He had already been twice under the water and been conscious. The third time, and he didn't know it, but we learned later, the third time was to be how long before he died. I probably could go on for hours telling you about these things, but the point is that when you lose your freedom, you don't know what you've lost. Later I went out as we left the camp and went to another small camp of women. But these women were also absolutely in a terrible state of affairs. And I don't think that any of us who went in the initial entrance of that compound came away with hands that weren't bleeding, because the women were so tight and so taut and itching with their fingernails to scratch our hands and kiss our hands just to be liberated. I shan't go on with this anymore. Though this happened nearly 70 years ago, it's just as vivid as though it were yesterday to me. It's a reminder that we really cannot take freedom for granted. And it's my hope that when you see this Declaration of Independence inside, that your appreciation for freedom will be rekindled, and that your patriotic freedom for America are renewed. In the end, our nation's destiny depends upon us here right now. It's best to be called by a statement of Benjamin Franklin. After he had finished all his work, a woman asked him, she said, "Mr. Franklin, what have you men wrought?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." I think that challenge made over 200 years ago is relevant today. And I want and wish each of you to take good measure to be sure that it's kept that way. God bless you all. Thank you.